Hello, I'm Ken Kinsley, and this is Finding the Words, the only podcast devoted to text-based art and artists. When most people think about drawing, the first things most likely to come to mind are doodles in notepads or maybe a life drawing class. But as a genre, some of the most important and memorable works of art ever produced are drawings, and it's still evolving. From the Renaissance brilliance of Da Vinci's sketchbooks to Van Gogh's post-impressionist emotional intensity, into the present day with groundbreakers like Tracy Emin's brutally honest emotional works and virtuoso draftsman William Kentridge. Also joining these modern-day trailblazers is Chicago's Tony Lewis, for whom the humble medium of graphite has led to some of the most innovative explorations of what is possible within contemporary drawing, while keeping his desire to challenge the conventions of language at the forefront of his practice. In his work, a lexically ambiguous sentence leads to a decade-plus long series. A beloved cartoon transforms into poetry. And the arguments from a famous debate antagonist combine with an arcane form of writing to become the basis of a major installation series. So it's only logical that Lewis was recently included in the four-person exhibition at the Menil Collection in Houston that closed on August 12th, titled What Drawing Can Be, Four Responses. Tony joined me from his studio in Chicago to talk about his love of mixology and why it's the best way to get to know a new town, a most fortuitous thrift store find, and how cutting up a treasured childhood keepsake led not only to his breakthrough series, but also to his favorite drawing in his studio. Here's my chat with Tony Lewis. Tony, it is wonderful to finally get to talk to you here.
Yeah, sorry. This is the basement storage area of mine.
I love it.
Sorry about the mess.
No, not at all. It's a backstage pass.
Yeah.
So I've seen you've talked at length before about trying to expand the definition of what drawing is, and so
Sure.
the fact that you were just in a show at the Menil Collection titled "What Drawing Can Be," four responses, just ended a couple days ago, August 10th, seems really fitting. Why focus on drawing? What was it that drew you to that?
Man, that's a good question. Drawing is one of those things that I guess that as I get older, I look back on it, and I look back on it in a pretty elemental way to say that it's something that existed to me for me in my life before art existed. And it does feel like something that might exist in my life outside of art. Um, and later in life, I feel like drawing will exist in my life, beyond art.
Mm-hmm.
So it was there before, it was there during, and it'll be there after, whatever, say, art might be, or whatever the art world might be, or whatever, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the context we might do it in professionally. Uh, Whatever that is, drawing it to me has always been that thing it's more akin to, you know, eating or breathing or walking,
Mm-hmm.
um, more so than it is about a particular vocation. It's more just like a way of, I think, understanding, you know, I guess, your position in the world, yourself in relationship to other people. It's a very elemental relationship to
Mm-hmm.
just you and stuff, other stuff,
Mm-hmm.
sort of the ability to sort of understand yourself in relationship to something else, to me is a really great way to think about, the fundamentally what drawing is. Um, and so like, it's one of those things where it naturally falls into something like art, because art is, again, this thing that fits between two people, that creates a dialogue, that sort of creates a connection. And same way with language, like talking and ideas and concepts, and is the thing that fits between two people so they can have some sort of understanding. I think drawing is one of those things that can be that, and it could also be, you can create a self dialogue, but you can also create a dialogue with one person or two people or many people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's not the only thing like that, but it is one of those really elemental things that you're kind of uh, encouraged to do at a young age. And I think it's one of those things you just kind of do without thinking about it. And that's always been super fascinating. Just those sort of basic principles,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to figure out how that sort of gets disseminated into a more academic or philosophical or political or um, art historical sort of context is a wild, wild journey.
And one of the things that you have worked into your drawing in that show, and you've done this in other exhibits and stuff too, is you have a focus on William F. Buckley's response to James Baldwin in their 1965 Cambridge debate, and you depict his words with stenography or shorthand. I guess they're kind of the same thing, right?
Sure.
Stenography and shorthand. Okay, I know one of them. Something's on the little typing thing that you use in a courtroom, but
Well, that's where it came from. It was actually the
yeah.
analog version of that. Before the typewriter, it was
Hmm.
people who were handwriting court
Hmm.
stenography. So they're recording this using this. It's a really archaic system, but they're
Yeah,
using a system that records speech at the rate of speech. So it's just like dots and dashes that
yeah.
are associated to phonetic sounds that you can record it much
Mhm.
easier. But once typing moved along, it completely, you know, erased the need for shorthand, like Greg
Mhm.
shorthand, as a writing system. In stenography in particular.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's where it came from. But those are the same thing. Yeah.
And instead of just painting it on or drawing it with graphite on a canvas or on the wall, you have graphite coated string that's wound around screws to create more of a 3D effect. How did you land on that particular format?
Yeah, I think that came about probably about 10, 12 years ago, just in terms of I got to a place where, the idea of drawing was sort of going to that, the way that I was thinking about drawing um, was, like I said, very elemental when I first got into school.
Mhm.
And, but as soon as you get into an art context, as soon as you get into graduate school, as soon as you start learning about art history and these types of things, then you start realizing, oh, I have to not just be concerned with the material or subject matters that I may know when I'm walking into this. I have to consider art history. I have to consider, just new dimensions. So, like, in a very simplistic way, I was going through a process of understanding what drawing looks like in a given space. And just to even break that down even more so, I was just trying to understand what drawing would be like in a studio,
Mhm.
like becoming aware of what it meant to have walls or a floor and a given space dedicated to making drawings. There's something weird about, in my opinion, there's something weird, or at least at that time, there was something weird about making two-dimensional artwork, say that was figurative or landscape, um, in a room, without necessarily giving any sort of uh, acknowledgement to the room itself and
Mhm.
its impact on the art that I was making. And so it just became a situation where drawing became just as much as about subject matter as it did space, as it did material, and sort of my how my body was interacting in space. All these things were kind of happening at the same time. So I started working on drawings on the floor, started working on drawings directly on the wall. Obviously, I was working on paper mostly, so the
Mhm.
paper took different forms and different shapes and different conditions and material in terms of graphite and pencil kind of itself expanded along with, beyond the pencil, along with sort of paper, along with the possibility that a drawing could go on the floor. That means maybe I need more than just a pencil. Maybe I'll switch to something like graphite powder because graphite powder covers a much larger area. And so that process was happening. And I was kind of just experimenting and figuring out all these different ways that a drawing could happen in a given space. Um, and one of the ways that I came across was, I took these little push pins in the wall and
Mhm.
I bought some rubber bands. And when I had rubber bands, I was dipping rubber bands in graphite powder, sort of like you would like a chicken and flour,
Mhm.
doing a little dredge, and then I would take the rubber band and I would stretch it and I'd smack it against the wall, and it would make this. It's still to this day. It makes one of the most beautiful, quickest drawings I've ever seen in the world. Just a rubber band snapped on a wall. It's sort of like the closest I can get to photography and drawing because it's a quick imprint of an actual object on a surface. So I was in this weird space of understanding that drawing, in the most elemental sense, that action, uh, sort of had this strong connection to something like photography uh, and just image making. So then, I did that with other objects and things like that. But those rubber bands were just on the floor, had some push pins that I was using to hold up other paper. And so I put a little constellation of those push pins on the wall, and I stretched a rubber band around it, and I said, huh, there's some weird tension here. And and you
Yeah.
do that for a few months every day, and you kind of get lost in that, and then you start realizing that there's some potential there for mark making and form making, and it was also happening at the same time in which language was developed as a pretty prominent subject matter, um, like letter forms,
Mhm.
and so those things just kind of happened at the same time,
Mhm.
and then it just was off to the races. Shorthand obviously came later in terms of what it meant linguistically and what it meant formally. Um, but it was a natural way for me to think about manifesting that work. If I look back and look at
Mhm.
a whole library of sorts of mark making techniques and sort of play that I was doing in those
Mhm.
very early days. So those things just kind of happened at the same time.
How did you come to shorthand as your, delivery method of the language?
Shorthand was really well. It's funny. It came out of language. It's because those shorthand is, whenever I'm using it to make a text drawing.
Mhm.
So conceptually, I always understand it as text drawing. It's just a really weird looking text. I think that I was at a time, around the same time, maybe slightly before, I was just buying a bunch of dictionaries, and I was buying a lot of books, and I sort of referenced a lot of books. And when I was looking at dictionaries, I was actually buying I was this was just really thick Croatian to, like English to Croatian dictionary, like
Mm.
Craig's book. It was super thick. It was just in a thrift store in Cleveland,
Mhm.
Ohio,
Mhm.
where I grew up. And next to it was this book that said Greg Shorthand Dictionary. It was just this whole section of dictionaries. And
Mm.
I looked at it, and then I realized that it was just a book filled with a bunch of squiggles with words next to it. I had never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of perplexed me on many, many levels. So there was two books there. I bought them both, and they were about 50 cents each. And
Best best dollar you ever spent.
it was a good dollar. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie. But it was, I ended up keeping those dictionaries for a long time, and I was very interested in shorthand. I tried to learn a little bit about it, and it was just this interesting thing for a while
Mhm.
until I tried to figure out I want to learn this a little bit more. I think this is interesting. I'm not sure how I'm going to use it, and I think I needed some time to develop the language around my relationship to it, in terms of understanding it as language.
Mhm.
So um, after a while, it was just a matter of, now that I'm relatively proficient, now that I kind of know what I'm talking about, because they were instruction books. They were basically ways to teach you about shorthand.
Mhm.
So I just went through them slowly and learned about them and referenced them, and I got pretty relatively, very basic understanding of it. And so once I had that basic understanding, it was basically the same as understanding words and texts. And at the
Mhm.
time, I was making text drawings, and so it was a very easy sequence to go from dealing with sort of a letter A and an E and being able to use it this way, in a conceptual, more diagrammatically abstract way, to shift over to shorthand, which I could use a lot of the same principles, but because of the form it takes, it ends up occupying, and also because it's handwriting,
Mhm.
it occupies this space that's more akin to abstraction in a more ex, expressive sense. It to me, it sort of opens up the world, at least in my brain, visually, to someone like Cy Twombly, or
Mhm.
somebody like Jackson Pollock or Franz Klein. These people that were doing very graphic, uh, very expressive, bodily, sort of mythic, cosmic sort of relationships. What they were doing, they were just kind of doing it, right?
Mhm.
And so to me, I was coming from a place where I had a very rigid, very specific understanding of language. And so shorthand basically allowed me to kind of free that process up. It allowed me to have the foundation of uh, a linguistic, systematic, like pre-existing sort of system of language, but I could manifest it as something that instead of reading, you kind of look at all at once, which is to me something that is more akin to, for lack of a better word, maybe painting or abstraction in general.
Hmm.
Um, if that answers the question.
Yeah, oh yeah, and you were interested in the Buckley Baldwin debate for quite some time now.
Yeah.
Did that the interest in shorthand kind of coincide with working on that, or was it like, hey, I've got this thing that I've been working on. Why don't I try the shorthand with Buckley's words?
Yeah, it was kind of like that. I think
Yeah.
that Buckley came first in a sense that I was exposed to. I mean, there's a whole narrative how I was exposed to
Hmm.
the debate, but what I ended up being interested in was Buckley's side,
Hmm.
and it's more or less an inspiration from a quote that James Baldwin said, but in his side of the debate,
Hmm.
but it ended up being that Buckley needed to be the focus for whatever reason,
Hmm.
and um, so that's lasted for about 11 to 12 years now. And I think over the years, I've definitely there have been some overlap moments with the two, because one is a way of making images and a way of understanding language, and the other is a subject matter. And so both of them kind of represent different ways I can deal with, say, language or image or story or subject
Hmm.
in drawing. And sometimes, and so they kind of exist outside of each other and different, and they manifest in different drawing projects, and sometimes they come together. So for the show at the Menil, they sort of crossed paths and came together to make that exhibition or to make that installation.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, I think that sort of happened definitely naturally, and especially in terms of, it's a very serendipitous moment for me to kind of, that the shorthand gesture that was in that exhibition, which just closed a couple days ago. The
Hmm.
short the shorthand exhibition, or excuse me, drawing that was in that exhibition, was compiled of three words written in shorthand, all of which were directly taken from a quote of Buckley. And so for me to kind of, and it just happens to be, and it's very serendipitous in a sense that they just happen to be shaped the way they were phonetically when they're
Hmm.
so, and I just so happened to then also turn them upside down and put them next to each other until it made this face. And when it made this face, it reminded me of a face that I had seen, because I've seen the footage of Buckley for over 10 years now.
Hmm.
And so there was just this like peak moment in terms of where it's very self-referential. I'm using language that produces an image that creates a cartoon of the person of the person who said the language. So it's a very intense situation, but also to me it is quite hilarious, just because it's the goofiest image. It's the goofiest sort of cartoon image of a very
Hmm.
serious situation,
Sure.
but also it's a very goofy photo of someone who I believe doesn't really take himself too seriously within the context of that subject matter. And so it kind of worked out conceptually on a few different levels, but formally it was kind of one of those things that just needed to happen.
So, from just a practical standpoint, especially since the show just ended, um, how long does an install for one of those take? 'Cause, I mean, that's how big is the piece
The
on the
work was
wall?
pretty big. It was, I think the walls
Like,
are maybe 24 feet wide, and maybe I think it
wow,
was maybe 12 or 14 feet tall.
wow,
It's pretty large work.
yeah. How long does something like that take? And then I'm assuming once the show's done, it's just disassembled and gone.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. the making of the work is very much, functions a little bit like a mandala in that sense,
Yeah, yeah.
without all the without all the meaning and weight of
Well,
the
it is
religion.
meaning. Yeah,
But I mean to say, it's like what we understand is something you work so hard on something and it just sort of dissipates. This happens a
sure.
lot in
Yeah,
art.
just
It happens a lot
that
with mirrors,
ephemeral nature.
right? But that I think that piece took about probably 2 weeks,
Oh,
and
wow.
but I also had a team of people, and also the institution was very very helpful in providing the space and providing the conditions to knock that work out, and I'm very fortunate to work with some pretty great people. Like I think my my main guy is Ed, who here in Chicago, who travels with me to make some of these installations sometimes.
Mhm, mhm,
And I wouldn't be able to do it without Ed. I wouldn't be able to do it without my sister, who's my studio manager. And we also had help from S.Y. Lim, who's a curator here in Chicago, who we're really good friends with, who was also there making that work. So it was who I've all worked with before,
mhm.
people that we actually just got back from a trip last year when we were in Paris installing a larger version of what we just did. So I'm very fortunate to have friends and also people who are, committed to the work, uh, to help me produce these things because I wouldn't be able to do these things by myself.
Besides just there's 3 things that I've seen you talk about that are constantly on your mind: drawing, which we've talked about, but also language and, of course, graphite. Um, Trying to undermine language, or at least the rules of language, seems to be kind of a constant theme in your work. What is it about language that begs for you to mess with it?
Um, you know what it is? It's actually not even that complicated. I mean, I'm sure there's many layers to it, but if as you're asking me right now, there's probably the if language wasn't so integral about how we talk about art and how
Mhm,
we understand it internally, publicly and privately, then I probably wouldn't be as interested in it. But it's just so intrinsic to how we understand each other and understand ourselves. Um, and I think I have a commitment to, I guess, creating a pretty accessible, body of work that can function many ways, but also, which is to say, lingual or prelingual and maybe postlingual. Uh, but I think it is one of those things where if we, I would probably it's just a way for me to understand what I'm doing. If I can sort of say what I'm doing and it makes sense to me, then I think someone else can understand. But if I
mhm,
say what I think I'm doing and I don't understand, then it's time for me to reevaluate. Writing has always been kind of crucial to the process in terms of drawing. Sometimes I do this sort of I make a drawing and then I write in response to it, and then I make a drawing in response to the writing, and I
hmm,
just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until it either makes a lot of sense or it makes absolutely no sense, or it just completely changes the subject matter from where it originally was. But it creates a bit of a dialogue that keeps me on my toes, and I think it's very important to kind of, at least as an art person, as an artist from my point of view, it's kind of important to have some sense of self awareness about what you're doing, and
mhm,
even if you don't know everything, it's good to know some things about what you're doing. And language just ends up being one of those things that I think people kind of can gravitate to and can sort of understand, but also it's something that, at the end of the day, I think firmly helps artists understand what they're doing, so they can be understood a little bit better. Um, but at the same time, as you say, I'm very interested in confounding and upending the power of language. And so
mhm,
I think it has a lot to do with the ability to play that line, um, to say that I want you to understand, but also want you to be a little confused about what you think you understand,
mhm, mhm,
because that in of itself is a very relatable uh, reality, at
mhm.
least for me.
Yeah. And you're, you know, examining power structures in the language, basically, but you're doing it with the most democratic medium possible. Was that sort of part of the thinking along the way, or
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so in a sense that I've always seen a stronger connection to drawing and writing than anything else.
Hmm.
Which is another way of saying, like, my relationship to language seems to language is a tough thing to work with. I
Yeah.
would say that it's a tough thing to work with insofar as same way that color is a tough thing to work with.
Hmm.
Uh, they both exist outside of the world, outside of the art context, and we deal with both of these things every single day. So it's kind of takes a certain level of hubris to try to use those things to make art, as if you're going
Hmm.
to change someone's understanding of the color yellow, or even the word yellow. But, but
Hmm.
I think it's I think if it's so it's just challenging. So
Hmm.
it's worth trying to do, but it just takes a certain level of proficiency and commitment to the idea. Um, but it's yeah, I don't know. I think I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? What was the question? Because I
Just
feel like
using.
places in my brain.
Yeah. Oh, no, no, it was good. We were talking about examining power structures with a
Sure.
democratic medium, but you've also talked about using language and color as tools without making them the subject.
Yes.
And it seems like color would be pretty easy. I mean, we use color and stuff all the time, and we don't think that unless you just paint something, like a Yves Klein blue, blue becomes the subject. But color, you can just put that in, and it doesn't feel like, oh, this is about red. Text is different, though. How do you make something not about the text, but it has text?
Yeah. I think part of that is to you upend what language typically does. So
Hmm.
when you give if you give somebody if you make a drawing of a page in a book, if people have and it's a big drawing, say, and if people have 20 minutes, they might read the page because they think that's what they're supposed to do because they're familiar with language in that
Hmm.
format. So people think if you have an artwork that looks like that, then that means, okay, this artwork's supposed to be understood the same way that I understand a page in a book. So that's how I'm going to treat it. Um, and that to me is 100%, a reality of the situation, whether the artist intended it or not. And I think, you know, the same, in my opinion, the same can go for color. The color conversation exists in terms of it's more of a conversation of abstraction.
Hmm.
If we're talking about somebody like it's hard to say that the subject matter of somebody like Frank Bowling's work is not color or color theory or yes it's paint, yes it's brushstrokes, but it is very much about how red sort of
Hmm.
hits, or even when you're talking about a Rothko or when you're talking about Yves Klein, the way that
Hmm.
color hits it, the level of meaning that it has to me is very similar to the impact that the word "you" has when you're thinking about Barbara Kruger's work. I mean,
Hmm.
it's, I mean, it
Yeah.
sets the tone and it completely and somehow it both completely shift the meaning of the thing in the art context.
Hmm.
Can't really work with that type of blue without referencing these client, and you can't work with the word "you" in the art world if you don't really, without
Yeah.
giving some sort of reference to Barbara Kruger, for
Hmm.
example. So I guess that's what I mean in terms of there are these things that exist out in the world that have been co-opted just through art history. So it's like there's a certain level of responsibility, I guess, what I'm getting at
Hmm.
in relationship to both of them. Uh,
Hmm.
but insofar as language, I would say it's all about. Weirdly to me, it has a lot to do with. I mean, language is pretty linear,
Yeah.
and so it's not that complicated. I think the meaning of words is complicated. How
Hmm.
we read them is pretty simple. So it's about sort of creating gaps between how we read and meaning. So
Hmm.
it's not too. It's sort of like to me, it's kind of like as simple as like being a DJ. You've got turntables. You just let the song go, but the second you like scratch it, it completely shifts everybody's
Hmm.
understanding of what they're doing. And so you scratch it in it for a long time. You keep scratching. All of a sudden, it's a completely different era of music, and
Hmm.
it changes the way people think, and it changes the way people move and dance. Yet it's the same sample record from this thing from before. So I think it has a lot to do with upending people's expectations for an anticipation for what to do next, or what to understand about the next thing. It's just sequential in that sense. It's about upending that a little bit, but also I think having a pretty good understanding of meaning in terms of and how language can be used.
Hmm.
Just off the top of my head, those are two
Hmm.
things that I think about
Sure.
quite.
And you've done that a lot in one of the series of your works. Um, I had to write it down. It's a long title. With people of color, peopled color, and the color of people colored people.
Yes.
I wish I could say that I memorized that, but no, I'm cheating. And and you have various parts of that on the paper, and some of it's missing, some of and it's always in the same exact spot, right?
Yeah.
Whichever parts are showing up, and you have hand drawn pencil lines in there directing people which way to read, which is sometimes backwards, sometimes skipping lines. You seem to flourish within parameters that you have to wrestle with. How important is that structure in your work?
For that body of work, it was very much about trying to, again, upend or
Mhm.
correct a particular sentence. So that was a sentence that I wrote back in like 2011,
Mm.
2010. Matter of fact, I wrote that sentence in 2010 when I was in school. So basically, that's the premise of that drawing series you're talking about. Is the title of like the title of the series? That's the sentence, and
Mhm.
that's the sentence, written out and spaced out pretty equally in 5 lines, and it's always on a sheet of paper that's 5 feet wide and 7 feet tall. And the first letter of the first word is always, you know, 10 inches from the top and 7 inches from the left border,
Mhm.
uh, and it's a pretty tightly mapped out positioning situation. So it's rooted in like engineering drawing, architectural drawing, drafting. It's
Mhm.
very tight and very technical. It's really, but then again, there's a lot of fudging because I'm a person and I'm an artist. I am not doing any engineering drawing anymore. That was in high school.
Mhm.
But so, I get a little bit lazy, but still, it's as tight as it possibly can be, down to, I think there's 64 characters, down to the final,
Mhm.
final period. Um, and so that once that was established, it sort of created this bridge in my brain between the sentence, the piece of paper, and the format that the sentence was taking on the piece of paper.
Mhm.
And once that happened, those things are just together 100% forever. And so that's just kind of how that project started. The second I made the one drawing, I knew I had to make the third, and I knew I had to make the fourth, and then I just kept making. I've got quite a few of those now over the
Mhm.
past like 12, 13 years or something like
Mhm.
that.
Is it still ongoing or
Absolutely, still
yeah,
ongoing.
yeah,
I
yeah.
have works here that I made
Hmm.
last year. I'm probably gonna taking a break. I'll probably jump back into it later this year, maybe next year,
Mhm.
while I'm working on some other bodies of work. But it's one of those, when I tend to make a drawing, I don't really stop. It just becomes another way to make a drawing. It's not necessarily. Sometimes I stop if I don't think the drawing's that good, or if it's just not worth continuing. But a lot of times, I'm always on the lookout for to make a drawing that can sustain itself for a long period of time, because then I can get a sense of what the purpose of the work is. I need more than just a good idea or a particular set of circumstances. I'd like that process to mature a little bit to get to a very particular thing that I haven't gotten to yet most of the time.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that series really did start with, it was really that was the foundation, and after that, it became about, you know attacking that original language, which in and of itself made no sense. It's just one of
Mhm.
those grammatic. It's one of those statements. I forgot what it's called, but it's a statement, sort of like that sentence where, a word is repeated so much that it doesn't really. I forgot what it's called. Sort of like,
Mhm.
that sentence: buffalo, 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 buffalo. Sort of
Yeah.
like that. How that's a grammatically correct sentence, but doesn't mean anything. I think it meant a lot that that sentence was grammatically correct. Made a lot. And to me, it was important that it was a compound sentence, and it was really important to bring together those two seemingly disparate terms in people of color and colored people. It was about finding a way to grammatically sandwich those things close together,
Hmm.
and as a way to kind of understand what that actually means and kind of point out the irony behind that, but also it felt like a really great framework because it's speaking around about 60 years of how language might function in relationship to more than that, quite honestly, over 100 years probably of how language might be understood
Hmm.
in relationship to describing many, many, many different groups of people. The majority of the people on the planet are sort of understood in
Yeah.
those terms. And so it's kind of a very interesting, weird, funny thing to start from. And then after that, it was just kind of creating a series. Each drawing ended up being like a reaction to that. Sometimes there were some drawings that reinforced that sentiment, whatever the sentiment was. And there are some drawings that completely cut down the sentiment, and some drawings that just had nothing to do with the original sentiment. But each
Hmm.
drawing is still, the framework's the same, the
Hmm.
structure's the same, the source is the same, and it ended up becoming a pretty, it basically became a way for me to learn more about myself and my tendencies uh, in relationship to, I guess originally my own language.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And my personal introduction to you, speaking of mixing, remixing, and scratching, was your anthology series with the taking Calvin and Hobbes cartoons and eliminating the pictures and just using the cartoon bubbles to create kind of a new poetry. How old were you when you became a Calvin and Hobbes fan, and at what point did they become something bigger to you than just something that was fun to read?
Wow. Yeah, no, it was, I was very, very young. This is pre-art, and this is
Yeah.
right around the time when drawing was a thing. I think, I don't remember what age I was, but I know that I think I got my first book. I stole actually my first Calvin and Hobbes from my sister. She was a Calvin and Hobbes fan, and I think it was like Adventures, The Revenge of the Babysat, or it was
Mm,
like one of those early books collections. It was after the comic had, shut down. I remember when the comic was in the newspaper,
mhm,
uh, but I think after it shut down, we started buying the books as they were available, and or we would like rent them from the library or things like that. But I think that to me was it was something straight out of childhood. It's always
mhm,
been there. It's one of those subject matters very similar to drawing in that is actually one of the first moments where I saw something that might resemble a version of what art is, and also might resemble a sort of text drawing or might resemble what humor looks like, and it was all kind
mhm,
of wrapped up into one. And it's terribly interesting to be able to achieve all of that all at once, and that she clearly has stuck with me for years. And so
mhm,
I've always been a fan. At this point, I own many, many copies of many, many books here at the studio and also at my house.
mhm,
But, it's just an ongoing thing, and it's been with me, many, many years. The decision to sort of bring it to the studio really did come about when, uh, I had just graduated and I had a very small studio space in the north side of Chicago. I was basically in a basement of a graystone house, which was actually a place that was rented as a storage unit. But the price was right, and and at the time I was making really small drawings. Or excuse me,
mhm,
I'm lying. The room is really small, but I was making very big drawings. So
mm,
text drawings I was just describing, the ones that are 5 feet
right.
wide, I'm making those in a room that's like 115 square feet, and the ceilings are literally 6'11". So
Oh,
that means the drawings would go straight up to the ceiling,
the
and the bottom would curl off and hit the floor. And but that was the mode, and I was like, I love this. This is great. So I need. That's what I can afford. And while I was making those big drawings, I think I think I wanted to create a body of work where I didn't have to make it in that space because it was so tiny, uh,
Mm.
and it was walking distance from where I lived. And so I basically just started, you know, I started messing around with. Actually, there was this book. There was a book that was a gift from my dad
Mm.
when I was very young, and that book was it's actually it was a Calvin Hobbes book that was a gift after I got an A, like an A minus on a history exam in like seventh grade. That book stayed with me forever. That book found its way to it was in my life right around this time of moving into the
Mm.
small studio, and I think it had been very dirty at that point, and I had bought a new version of that book. I
Mm.
had two or three new versions of that book, but I still had the old book that my dad, he wrote on the inside and said, "Hey, this is a gift to you for getting an A minus on your history exam," and he dated it. It was like 2001 or something like that, and I cherished that thing for a very long time. That book ended up being something that I brought into the studio. Ended up getting a little bit of graphite on it, and I realized that I think because of the meaning of what it was just impregnated with all this time. It felt like something that, it might be a great thing, like something I cared about, is sort of something that I didn't really want to let go. That seemed like the right way to destroy or cut a Calvin and Hobbes book because it felt kind of sacrilegious to cut Calvin and Hobbes and to
Mm.
sort of cut it up and to turn it into small things. So I said, why don't I do it with this thing that means a lot to me? So I'm losing something too. It's not just a matter of just this isn't just a disrespect out of Calvin and Hobbes. This is actually hurtful for me.
Mm. So
That's what it
so
is.
everything in that series is from that one book,
Until that book was gone. Yeah.
and
So
then
that
you
book, this we're
yeah.
talking 2013. So
Mhm.
that book was completely gone, probably within a year and a half. And then by that time, the process of the collages and the small drawings had sort of expanded, and I
Mhm.
had a few old books, and so I just started using some of my old books, um, to keep that project going, which then culminated in that the book of poetry.
Mhm. Did you keep the page that your dad wrote on?
I did. That's
Okay,
actually
good, good.
in my studio. It's right over there. It's on the
Oh,
wall.
nice,
I got a
nice.
wall small drawing. It's such a great question, and that's actually I've quoted that as saying that's one of my favorite earliest oldest drawings in the studio is my dad's chicken
Mm.
scratch handwriting on the inside of that. It was the authoritative Calvin and Hobbes book.
Nice. And for those pieces in Anthology, how much did you agonize over which words to eliminate and cover up and which ones to keep? Was that a tough process, or was it just did it go pretty quickly?
It was very quickly. It was formal. It was very improvised. I mean, it would
Mhm.
take about 5 minutes to make a drawing. So if I'm sitting down for a
Wow.
couple of hours, then I'm making 20, 30 drawings in one
Mhm.
sitting. So I was able to kind of just keep going and keep going and keep going and until I amassed a bunch of really small drawings. There's some around, I'm literally sitting among all this. So there's like some right over there that are on the walls.
Cool.
They're about this big, so they don't take much time to
Mhm.
make. And I was doing that for several months, and so I'm having hundreds and hundreds of little teeny drawings that I'm not really thinking about as I'm making. I'm just moving. I like that word. That's funny. Let's get rid of this. Just keep this word. Let's use this preposition. Let's use this linking verb. Let's say this particular subject matter. I like this word. Let's get rid of all this. Don't like any of these words. You know what I'm saying? And it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
kind of just a quick move, 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 move until I realized I have this pile of drawings that just basically look like piles of small pieces of paper. And then I just start organizing them. And when I'm
Oh.
organizing them, I'm kind of building phrases and sentences. And that's how I got to the format of the collages, because the collages
Mm.
are actually in the format of a comic strip. So I
Yeah,
looked, so it's the title page because I was drawing a lot of the title pages, or like the title panels. If
right.
you ever Calvin and Hobbes, there's a title and small little squares, some circle, and they were all just mixed up together. So I just sort of organized them to fit, and I was writing little teeny, you know, word word groupings and phrase groupings, which I called poetry because there's no lack of a better
Sure.
term.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you'd cut out each panel
Yeah.
and create, get rid of some words and just have it cut down to 2, 3 words, and then take those and assemble them into what looks like I figured that when you were talking about doing a drawing, that you had an idea for each page. I need this one over here, I need this, but that just happened almost like, not Mad Libs necessarily, but
It was sort of like that. Yeah, I was
yeah,
just sort of putting together things that I would just see the juxtaposition of two phrases. If one, if I don't have a, there's a, I'm sure there's literally books right in there, but
yeah,
one a thing would say I love, and then it would say chicken. Then I'd be like, I love chicken. Okay, let's go for there. So those go together.
and then just
And,
whatever popped up, and that's fascinating. I didn't realize that. I thought it was more planned out for the whole page. That's
I think
that's
it was
even more
both.
fun.
It was both ways. It definitely was.
Yeah.
I would, if I'm sitting in a pile of words, which essentially is my library, pile of drawings, pile of phrases. Some
Mhm.
phrases worked better with different, so it's like they were just put together by me, sort of, you know,
Sure, sure.
I like this title. And then I built the poem. And like, actually, this is the wrong title. Let me go look at the other titles I have. This is a good title. This
Mhm,
works.
mhm,
So it would be like that editing process, but it was very much me making. It was a wild form of writing
mhm.
because it was rooted in appropriation, but because of the editing processes and because of how everything was kind of mixed together, it really felt. It still feels like it's like a very convoluted form of original writing.
Mhm.
Because when you read those poems, they don't read as Calvin Hobbes. They read as
No.
pretty intense, esoteric, and sometimes very sweet moments um,
Mhm.
that are just their own thing altogether.
And there in all your work, there's so many different layers or elements where, like number 1, you've got kind of the visual look and tactile quality of the actual piece. So, and then of course you've got the poetry that pops up in a lot of it, especially the anthology. And then there's the social perspective that can come in with all that. Do these have a ranking for you when you are working? Is it like, is there one thing that outranks the other?
Not personally.
Yeah.
I think what I love about my at least my approach is that I'm interested in making drawings, and
Mhm.
everything is kind of the same. I've got drawings that, like I said, take about 5 minutes to make that are 2 inches by 2 inches. Then I've got
Mhm.
floor drawings, which are massive installation,
Yeah.
that take several people and a tremendous amount of work and material, and they take up an unbelievable amount of space, and they function more, sculpturally.
Mhm.
And then I've got works that function on the wall that again take a couple weeks to do, that need a team of people that are shorthand based. And each one of these, and I got text drawings, and I got a few different versions of of the shorthand works and the Buckley works that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the idea is that I'm interested in creating many different ways to make drawings, so that I can kind of use all of these sort of ways as a way to create a definition of what drawing can be.
Mhm.
And so it's very useful for me to start a drawing process or find a drawing process that can do something that no other process of drawing can do, which is sort of something I'm just interested in. And that's why I love these works. It's like, or that's why I love all of these different ways of working, because they complement each other
Mhm.
towards a more, hopefully a more specific definition of drawing.
Mhm.
Yeah, without yeah, I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there.
And, back in, I guess it was April, you participated in the Barely Fair, art fair in Chicago, and you had, as you say, an all-inclusive experimental cocktail lounge
Yeah,
installation titled Lewis Bag, where you were doing some mixology.
yeah.
Um, this is just an addition to the art, right? You're not gonna leave us for,
Oh no,
right. Okay, good, just checking.
not at all.
But, how and when did you get into mixology?
Well, just before I talk about that, quick shout out to Kate Sears-Patowski, Josh Deal, and Roland Miller, who started Barely Fair with me. Like the four of us, excuse me, the four of us together came up with the idea of Barely Fair. It's this amazing thing that happens in Chicago. It's happened. I mean, it's probably one of the most incredible things that I've been a part of. That is the most homegrown Chicago art project um, that maybe not everybody feels this way, but to me it feels like such um, a Chicago-based, community-based, artist-run, community-based situation
Hmm.
that has really blossomed into a pretty great project. It's just like a miniature art fair uh, that it's like
And
100%.
and literally miniature, right? I mean,
Yeah,
every
literally
yeah.
miniature. The booths are 12:1 scale, and we invite artists, local galleries, and sometimes international galleries, all to sort of create mini booths and to show their small artwork. And
Hmm.
it's just such an incredible thing. It's a really 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 special thing that because it's taken so seriously, we've taken it so seriously over the years. It's been a great thing to be a part of. But
Hmm.
so that's so shout out to those guys. But no, I think it's so funny. Like when things started, about 10 years ago or 12 years ago, when my art career was sort of jumping off, I realized that I was traveling a lot, and one
Hmm.
of the ways that I've always kind of understood myself in relationship to a city is I tend to go to the cocktail bars because it tells me one, you know, I feel like I've always had an affinity. I've always been a great hobby of mine, and there's two things that if I'm going to the city for the first time, there's two things I look at. It's the gallery scene, the art scene, and it's where the cocktail bars are. And usually those things give me a sense of certain neighborhoods. It gives me a sense of certain sensibilities. It gives
Hmm.
me a sense of, and it's also both of those things represent a kind of universal language whenever you're out and about. I think I can go somewhere in Australia, and if I can walk to a cocktail bar and I can ask for the last word, and they'll know what I'm talking about, and so that'll be a way for me to sort of connect with the person or a particular culture or community, and maybe that's my gateway into learning a little bit more about Australia.
Hmm.
I've done that many many times in many many different places, and so I think ever since, and I've done that for a long time, and so being able to connect with people that way, and also kind of, I mean, if you're, I don't know, if, I think you said you're in LA.
Yeah.
It was one of the first places, one of the LA was one of the first places where I started to travel, and I would find myself at certain places, and I developed great relationships with certain bartenders in certain places, that because it ends up being a community. It mirrors a lot of what I love about the art world, or more specifically, what I like about artist relationships.
Hmm.
I think you have a certain appreciation for work and labor, and also you have an opportunity to be a little bit creative and generous. And I've always been interested in. I think the there's a certain level of nobility and a certain level of generosity rooted in hospitality, and that's something that I've also always been kind of interested in. And
Hmm.
so to me, it kind of spiraled into once you learn how to make a Manhattan, you want to make a Manhattan for somebody, so you got to throw a party.
Yeah. And one of the items on your menu for the Lewis bag, you had an item called the bartender's choice, and obviously you would make one up. Do you like size the person up like some sort of this
Sure,
person seems like they're gonna want X, Y, or Z?
absolutely. I want to be clear. I'm doing this as an artist, and I'm sort of functioning as a bartender, but I'm not professionally trained. I'm not,
Hmm.
I'm just a fan of cocktails. I love making cocktails, and I love
Sure.
hosting. And so so in my studio space that we developed, it's just upstairs. We developed a place where it's kind of built out like a cocktail lounge. And so when you walk in, the lights are set. the music set, and it's a whole vibe.
Nice.
I did that for a lot of reasons, but I think mainly it's because it ends up becoming a place where, number one, I feel comfortable, and
Hmm.
also it's a place where everybody else feels comfortable. And I think that, ironically, has proven to be one of the most impactful contexts for art conversation to happen, and also just for human energy to happen,
Hmm.
in a way that feels very very generous, but also um, generative for me.
Hmm.
I you know I get to work on some things that I've been working on and share some things with people, and they can tell me if they hate it or love it, and hopefully they love it, and it sort of ends up being a very it's just a fun thing to do in relationship to drawing. It
Hmm.
also ties in because I've been working on this series of still lives, which are basically me drawing cocktails that I've made, and
Hmm.
so I've for I've been doing this since the pandemic, actually. Since the pandemic, since everybody was locked in the house, I realized I was making a cocktail every so often, and I figured I'll draw this one, and it became a really diaristic project. It started off as a joke, matter of fact, but it ended up being something that I had to contend with the fact that the drawings were getting better, and the drinks themselves were sometimes good and sometimes absolutely horrendous.
Oh, sure.
But it ended up being this really great project that again allowed me to do something else that I hadn't done yet in drawing,
Hmm.
which was again a sort of like a still life drawing,
Hmm.
and again around something that I kind of cared about, around something I kind of knew something about.
Hmm.
And so the creation of the lounge really just feels like a space for me to showcase not just the cocktails that I make or create, but also it's a chance for me to show these drawings, because the menu for that lounge is actually on the wall, and it's the drawings that are on the wall in the space.
Hmm.
Every year in Chicago, you standing invitation to stop by the studio, and you'll see you'll see like a suite of like five drawings on the wall. That is the
Nice.
actual menu that's available that season. I'm currently working on a fall winter menu, and I've
Very
had a
nice.
spring summer up for the whole
Sure.
since April.
Nice. And you're really, I get the sense that you're just a seeker. You just love trying out new things and bouncing ideas off people. And the show that you were just in at the Menil seems like a great, place to be getting that. You were with three other artists who were kind of like-minded in that sense. Jillian Conrad doing some 3D installations, Teresita Fernandez doing a really cool charcoal panorama that took up all four walls of one gallery space there, and Konstantin Lusser doing some 3D wire drawings. Was there anything that you picked up? Were there some good conversations between the four of you? Were there chances for conversations? I saw there were some artists talk series going on. Were you able to get together with the three of them?
Yeah, I think we were fortunate enough to sort of be able to hang around each other during installation. It was a
Hmm.
very, I think your question points to something we kind of talked about while we were there as a group loosely. It was a very unique exhibition experience.
Hmm.
That the Menil decided to open up the space to create four artists to create sort of miniature solo kind of project.
Hmm.
So they were able to sort of have a focused approach to what one could understand to be like a group exhibition. And I
Hmm.
think it's a very innovative way of going about trying to put a show together. And I think what's most interesting, I had never been in a situation like that, and I don't think neither had the artists, in terms of, it was this in between space between, the focus intensity of a solo project, but it also had the air and the kind of vibe of a group project.
Hmm.
When you've got a dedicated team working on this thing, you've got a good sized room, and we all know how to make shows. It's very weird to make shows, to make a show next to somebody else who's making a show down the street from somebody else who's making a show. By street, I mean down the,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the other building. next to somebody else who's making a show. So it's like the intensity was different because I think our mindsets as artists is to focus on what we're doing when we're given a space. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I think we all felt the need and the desire to sort of check in with each other, not so much about the work, but just as people. We were sort of like, hey, how you doing with your show? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know about the work, but how are you doing? This is a pretty interesting experience. And so we had a couple great moments where we were able to connect and hang out and just kind of support each other as artists, sort of working on a relatively focused sort of endeavor, which again, very new and something that I imagine they will do again for sure. And I definitely appreciate my time with those guys 100%.
Mhm. What what is on the horizon for you right now? Any you said you're working on some new stuff. Anything we should be looking out for
Oh, geez. Well,
that you can tell us about?
there's a couple things that are coming down the pike. There are some things that I'm kind of working on. Got to make some decisions in terms of what I'm
Mhm.
prepared for. At this point, I'm just kind of taking a we've dealt with I feel like I just closed that exhibition, and there's probably nothing I could probably talk about right now, but
Yeah.
some definite things that are sort of being worked on right now that I'm kind of trying to figure out what's the best place for this, and what's the best sort of context for a type of work. I feel like the difficulty of being an artist is, some artists make art for shows, and some artists make art, you know, for the sake of the work, and I think both can be right.
Mhm.
Um, and I think I'm a lot of times sometimes I function both ways depending on the situation or depending on the work.
Mhm.
Right now, I'm in a place where I'm thinking I've made a body of work for the work, and now I've got to figure out, all right, how am I going to make a show out of this nonsense? Yeah. So so it's the opposite effect of sort of I have a show idea, I want to go do, what I'm saying, like the show at the
Mhm.
minute is very much like this is an all encompassing thing based off of architecture. Whereas, what I'm currently working on is more so, more insular and more about it and less about the wall that it goes on, or less
Mhm.
about the floor that it sits on, or something like that. So making a show is one of the great challenges I think of being an artist, and so but that's a whole context I don't have control over at this point.
Mhm.
I feel like one thing that I've learned, especially in the past few years, it's really important to keep working. It's really important to obviously be ready for opportunity, but more so be able to, you know, I've always had like 4 or 5 exhibitions in my brain at a given time, and so
Mhm.
it's less about knowing uh, exactly what is what's next, and more so, am I prepared for what's next? Is kind of is sort of the way that my brain is kind of functioning right now,
Mhm.
because it's more about I have to make moral decisions, about this thing or the other thing,
Yeah.
which is a whole nother conversation. But the work itself is in a good place.
Excellent. Well, definitely looking forward to whatever comes up next. Tony, thank you so much.
I'm glad we got to do this again.
A big thank you to Tony for joining me and also to you for listening in. Until next time, thank you. Take care.